the Holocaust that they lived through and didn't live through, and her own reflections on the book, a book that she read 20 years ago and revisited, as she says, now that I'm older. So I think that's going to be very interesting. And please, it's a participatory discussion, so ask as many questions as you want as we go. So let's give Prof. Marwala a warm round of welcome.
Thank you very much. How many of you have read this book? Please raise your hand if you have read the book. Wongani, I would have expected you to have read it.
Long time ago.
You asked me to read it about 3 months ago.
You have read the book, isn't
Yes,
it?
I did, because it was.
So,
Yes, yeah, that's, I haven't got to the last couple of pages yet.
so
I'm
the title of the book is Eichmann in Jerusalem and the Banality of Evil. The original one did not have the banality of evil. It was just Eichmann in Jerusalem. But if there is one thing that has come out of this book, it is the concept of the banality of evil. So thank you very much for coming to share this reading with me. As I have already indicated, I believe that reading is very, very important. I believe that as universities, and certainly me as the leader of this university, if there is one thing that I should do right, is to get all of you to start reading. So this is the 5th book that I have read this year. We have read 21 lessons for the 21st century. We have read Thinking Fast and Slow. We have read The 4th Industrial Revolution. Which other book have we read? AI Superpowers. And is the history of the Second World War. Even though now I have become interested in the Second World War. So where I come from in Limpopo, there was a young man by the name James. And James said to me, when I was growing up, I also just have to confess that there were many people who actually read stuff for me. Julius Caesar was read for me by a gentleman called Amos, now Dr. Amos. And he said, no, you should come with a few friends and I will read for you Julius Caesar. And at that point I couldn't speak English. So it was read to me in English and translated into Venda. And the second one, by the way, I really enjoyed the reading. He seemed to have forgotten. I had to remind him that he read that book for me. Then there was a gentleman who was doing history in high school. I must have been in primary school. And he said he was going to narrate for me the history of the Second World War. It took a couple of days. We were walking. So he was narrating to me while we were walking. And from that moment, I was hooked to the history of the Second World War. All the personalities. Of course, there is one major personality in the Second World War, and that is Adolf Hitler. He is the one who started it all. And then you had other personalities, senior personalities. Himmler is another one, mass murderer. And then you also, an interesting story about Himmler was that at that point, the Nazis had a crazy idea of science that they used to put it along ethnic lines, that there is an Aryan science and there is a Jewish science. And of course, by that they meant things like relativity, because Einstein was the one who came up with it, but also quantum mechanics, even though the person who came up with it was Max Planck. And what happened, one of the big personalities in quantum mechanics is a gentleman called Heisenberg. And Heisenberg is an interesting figure. Heisenberg won a Nobel Prize at a very young age. And he was nominated by Albert Einstein to win the Nobel Prize. So he came up with the Heisenberg uncertainty principle. And because he was participating in this science that was not acceptable to the Nazis, Himmler started sending him people to intimidate him. And it turns out that when they were younger, Himmler's mom was a friend to Heisenberg's mom. So the moms had to sort out the differences. In fact, Heisenberg's mom went to Himmler's mom and said, why is your son actually intimidating my son? And the second thing about Heisenberg, I will come to the book itself, that is actually interesting, is that we do not know whether he was responsible for making sure that the Germans did not have an atom bomb. Because as you might not know, the first country to actually split an atom were the Germans. And they knew that the power that an atom bomb can actually be able to do. So Heisenberg was the person who was in charge of developing this bomb. And apparently, this is what the story says, he did the calculations and he was off by a factor of 100. So they knew that they could make a bomb, but the quantity that you need to make a bomb, you couldn't be able to use a ship, or you could not be able to use even an aeroplane to be able to go and drop it. So now the big question is, did Heisenberg knew? Did he know, did you knew, but just decided to deny the Nazis the atom bomb? The British don't seem to think so, because after the war, they took all these Nazi scientists that they could get hold of, because some ended up on the other side, Russia, and then they asked them to make the calculation, and they claim that he was off by a factor of 100. So the question of whether Heisenberg knew or not is a big issue. So within the Nazi hierarchy, you had all these people who were overseeing mass murder. So you had people like Himmler to Adolf Hitler. And then later on, when in the Nuremberg trial, when they asked him, so why didn't you do something about it? And he says, I thought about it, but I needed a ladder, and I couldn't get a ladder. The people who were supposed to have acted, and they had the power to act, either they did not know, or they were too insignificant to make any difference, or they were afraid. So that is, thank you very much, Dr. Muloi. I think he needs to be given a round of applause. He just completed his PhD. Yeah. And I later found out that you were also at SOMAFCO.
Yes, sir. This is a postdoc at JAS.
And he's a postdoc at JAS. So you had all these hierarchies of Nazi leaders. Goebbels was another personality that was there. He was a terrible, very clever man who used his wisdom for evil. Goebbels is popularly known for saying that a good lie is a lie that you tell it so often that you yourself start believing that it is true. That was Goebbels. So those were the senior leaders. And I'll put Speer as part of the senior leaders. Then you have the second level. On the second level, this is where Eichmann actually falls. These are people who would not normally be in places where the big decisions are made. So he comes from Austria. And Austria and Germany speak the same language. It's called German. So as we know, the First World War, the first aggression, maybe not an aggression, because it looks like the Austrians were actually quite enthusiastic. Naturalized German. I was born in Austria. So that was where Eichmann came from. And Eichmann was considered an expert on what they call the Jewish question. And what is interesting, and I don't know how it is written in German, but this expression, the Jewish question, the first time I heard it, it was an article written by Karl Marx, who was Jewish himself. So the expression, I don't know how it, but that is the first time I heard about this was by Karl Marx. So he was an expert in Jewish question. He could speak. In fact, when he was ultimately arrested, the first claim was that he was Jewish. He was responsible closer to the blood. They are always closer to the blood than the people who sign papers. I have read somewhere that in the courts of law where death penalty is allowed, if you allow judges to go and witness executions, then a certain proportion of, and the more separation you have, the more that system of that capital punishment is going to sustain itself, certainly amongst the people in there. It's like drug laws. Exactly. So he was one of the people who were doing this. And the way genocide was done, and I must confess, I have been to 2 places, and I've seen 3 places where genocide was conducted. The first place I went was the Dachau concentration camp. I went inside. I saw the ovens. I saw the showers that did not really have water coming out some of the times, but gas. Then I went to the famous concentration camp in Poland, Auschwitz. I have never been out inside Auschwitz, but I have seen it. I visit a university in Poland, and they took me everywhere. I did not know that it was close to Auschwitz, and they took me to this place where they had salt mines. And as we were driving out, I see a sign, Auschwitz. And I asked, is Auschwitz here? And they wanted to speak as little as possible. I could see there are people who are quite embarrassed about the episode. These were Polish people. And Tshilidzi, this highlights the concept of collaboration with the enemy. I'm not saying you are obviously, you will be punishing somebody who collaborates with the enemy, you know. But I wanted to say that, you know. So they were actually quite embarrassed about it, and that was the last place they wanted to show me. And then the third concentration camp which I went to, or the place which talks of concentration, was the one in Kigali. The one in Kigali where the Tutsis and the Hutus, you know what happened? Approximately 1 million people were massacred with a machete within a very short space of time. And of course, the Hutus and the Tutsis are a very interesting people because they speak the same language. So the way it worked, the Belgians, when they were deciding who was Hutu or Tutsi, they looked at your hair and they looked at your nose and they looked at your cheekbones. If your nose looked like you come from the Horn of Africa and you have high cheekbones and your hair is very curly, then you were a Tutsi. That was the first criteria. Or if you had 10 cows. Yeah, you can read about it. If you had 10 cows, automatic, you are Tutsi. So you had families where the older son will be Tutsi, another one will be Hutu, because the younger one is poorer than the older one. So that is really what it is. And those differences led to genocide. I think human beings are probably fundamentally evil. And to be good, you have to try hard to be good. I mean, if you think about it, especially when you look at the Hutus and Tutsis, In fact, it was so bad that Hutus were killed because they were thought of being Tutsis and vice versa. Very, very important. And coming back here in South Africa, we know what happened in apartheid. Experiments of cholera where I come from. The separation, the great separation of our people in Limpopo. You are a Tsonga, you are a Venda. Same people, by the way. Same ancestry. What is your last name? If your last name sounds Nguni, you are Tsonga. If your last name sounds Venda, then you are Venda. And the next, actually a story that, compelling story was a story that I was told by Mashamba, George Mashamba, an ANC leader. He says when they were doing the separation, he says, no, in fact, my name is not Mashamba. My name is Chauke. I just wanted to stay in Venda after the separation. And secondly, he says his sister was a teacher in a village. And his sister obviously is Tsonga, genuinely Tsonga. And then she goes to school, they say, you are no longer a teacher here. Why? Because Vendas are not. When issues of identity are not handled well, and there are evil people running around. Coming back home, we know about the xenophobic attacks. By the way, I still cannot tell the difference between somebody from Zimbabwe and somebody who comes from Venda. I still cannot differentiate somebody who comes from Botswana and somebody who comes from South Africa. So, obviously, because people look the same, they will ask 3 languages in South Africa. What is it? That is if you did not know how to speak isiZulu. Yeah, isn't it? If you know how to speak isiZulu, you're fine. And you had huge amounts of people, because the first criteria, the first time, what will happen, they will say, where do you come from? You say, from South Africa. And everybody will, to be safe, they will say, you are Venda. You would not believe how many people have been introduced to me. And they say, I want you to meet somebody from your place. And I greet them, they can't speak back. Because they were hiding from the possibility of being attacked because of their identity. So these things that happened even during this question are still happening today. Now, in Germany, how did genocide happen? First, expulsion. Dachau is the only concentration camp in Germany. And it is it's one of the smaller ones. So the question is why? And many of them were in Poland and other parts of Europe. Why? There are many explanations that people give. The first one is that if it is inside Germany, maybe the ordinary people can see it and they can revolt. So they did not want to take any chances. So the expulsion was to take people from Austria, from Germany to Poland, to concentration camps. And of course, when you expel people, to minimize resistance, you lie to them. You tell them that wherever they are going is better than where they are. And those things actually happened. And Eichmann was at the center of this. And the second solution is concentration. You put them in areas that are actually enclosed so that they cannot escape. And that was the birth of the concentration camps. It was not the birth of the concentration camps. I have to correct myself. Because the concentration camps were actually born in South Africa. You know the history of the Anglo-Boer War and the birth of the concentration camps. So that was the birth of the concentration camps, certainly in Europe. And then you had all these people who are in concentration camps. What do you do with them? It is pretty clear that the intention was always to kill. Pretty clear. And there was a conference, it's called Wannsee Conference, where Eichmann was there. The chair was, I forget the name of the chair, but it's the person who died in Moravia. And what is his name again? I watched a movie on him. Reinhard. His name was Reinhard. So Reinhard was the chair of that conference. And it was decided that people are going to be killed, exterminated. So they call that the final solution. And the aim, there were many people who were killed. The gypsies, anybody. Most of you who are Africans, if you happen to have been in Germany at that point, would have been headed to the same place. That is going to be a final solution. And that final solution is going to be extermination. And of course, the Germans were the most industrialized country in the world at that point. So, what was different from the concentration camps in South Africa and the concentration camps in Germany and Europe was the fact that the people who were committing the crimes were the most technologically advanced people on the planet. Just to give you a scale of how advanced they were. If we were to use, now that we are in a week of Nobel Prizes, which it was roughly just less than 40 years after the Nobel Prizes were introduced, more than half of them were awarded to people from Germany. More than half. And by the way, after the Second World War, Germany never reproduced that level of scientific activity. So you had these people who were very, very advanced. And many of them were industrialists. And these industrialists were collaborating. Very nice. So these industrialists were actually collaborating. And then I will give you one example of one of such industrialists. Was a famous engineer called Ferdinand Porsche. That car called Porsche is named after him. He had dinner with Hitler, and Hitler drew a car that looked like a Beetle, and it actually became the Beetle car. And it was designed by Ferdinand. He designed it, you know. By the way, Porsche is owned by VW. So he was an engineer in VW. So these people were collaborating. They were having dinners with him. Of course, after the war, they will deny that. And they did deny all those things. So they put the killings at an industrial scale. Their scientific knowledge of chemistry, including chemistry of death, was actually quite advanced. So they killed, the figure is about 6 million people. One thing that we don't actually appreciate is how short the Second World War was. The second thing that we don't appreciate is how short Adolf Hitler was a leader of Germany. Basically from 1933 to 1945. He was there for a very short space of time, and within a very short space of time, he was causing havoc all over the world. He obviously was a supremacist. There is a story of the 1933 Olympics. Is it 1933 Olympics? Where an African American by the name J.C. Helms won. And he refused to shake his hand. Still remember that. And of course, that 1933 Olympic Games were televised by a famous German director. You know who she is, isn't it? Which one? No, it's the lady. She made a movie called The Triumph of the Will. Lina, it's Lina. Of course, we know Lina spent the rest of her life studying the anatomy of Africans in Sudan. I don't think it was anatomy. She was not a biologist. She was an educated, isn't it? You know, Lina was actually a good, and apparently many of the filming techniques she introduced, like filming when you are moving. She was the one who did that. So I guess what I'm trying to say is that this genocide was more than just few people who were sitting at the table in the Nazi Party. If the population did not want it to happen, it could not have happened at the same scale. Because the people who were killed specifically because they were identified by their neighbors. There were few who protected, but many of the neighbors actually participated. So I'm going to go back to the partition of the vendors from the Tsongas. So you have this partition that is happening. So you know what happens in a situation like that? People are going to be moved. So if you are wealthy and you have immovable goods, like big houses, your neighbors can't wait for you to move so that they can move in. So there's an element of that. there's an element of people saying that, hey, when people are no longer here, that shop that is there probably will be mine. So collaboration is driven by all sorts of things. Greed, hatred, and so on and so forth. Now, where was Eichmann in all of this? So Eichmann says, no, all I was doing was following the law. And Hitler was the law. When Hannah actually analyzes this man, she comes to the conclusion that he seems not to have an inherent hatred for Jewish people. To be just the guy who was doing the work. And there is a story in the book where he was taken to a concentration camp. And when he arrived at the concentration camp, the commander of the concentration camp says, let me show you a mobile killing device. I want to demonstrate it for you. Of course, demonstration means somebody is going to be killed. And apparently he was making excuses why he can't. So on one hand, you have somebody who will readily sign hundreds of thousands of people to be transported to be killed. But he does not have the guts to go and look at one case. So evil sometimes is hidden behind bureaucracy. You put too much paperwork. You say all you need to do is to make a signature. Then people are going to continue to sign things that they are. If they were actually good people, they would not sign. So Hitler was defeated. Why was he defeated? One of the reasons that people say is that he opened a new frontier war, a new front, when he attacked Russia. Because at that point, Russia was being ruled by a gentleman from Georgia who could actually not, I don't know, Julia, whether you speak Russian, but they say that when he spoke, you could tell he was not Russian.
And he didn't look Russian.
And he did not look Russian. In fact, when he was rising to power, he was undermined because everybody says, of course the Soviet Union will not be ruled by anybody who is not Russian. And when they woke up, within a very short space of time, the man was in charge. And he was in charge for nearly 30 years. And in the process, it is estimated he killed 25 million people. That was Stalin. So Stalin had a pact. He had a pact with Hitler that you don't interfere with our affairs and we don't interfere with your affairs. But Hitler obviously did not take that seriously. So he marched on to Moscow. He actually almost reached, the German troops were seeing Moscow they could see it. And then the fate of nature came, and the winter happened, and obviously the rest is history. There is a story that another Georgian by the name Beria said, Moscow is not Russia. We can move. And they wanted to move to Ekaterinburg. And the train was parked. All of Stalin's goods were actually taken, were inside the train, and he was walking up and down, and he decided that we are not going to leave Moscow. But even before then, when the Germans attacked Russia, the Soviet Union. He couldn't believe it. Apparently, he was just looking at the walls and saying, I can't believe it. And then he just stayed in his house, and you have this Central Committee of the Communist Party of the Soviet Union. They're saying, where is the leader? The Germans are here. We are not hearing anything. So 3 days later, because you can't just go after a day, because otherwise Stalin will kill you, you know. So they arrived. He was convinced they had come to arrest him. Say, why are you here? They say the Germans have attacked. Says, so what do you want me to do? They say, we want you to lead us. Say, is there nobody who can lead you? They say, there's absolutely no one who can lead us. So the Germans attacked Russia, and they were fighting 2 wars on too many fronts, and that was the beginning of the end. And by 1943, it was actually quite clear that the Germans are actually on their last rope. And towards the end, people started making deals. Himmler was making deals, releasing people from the concentration camps, hoping that he is going to remain as a leader after the war was defeated. And then the Nazis, the inner circle was starting to become agitated. There is an attempt on Hitler, which was not successful, almost successful, by the way, because the person with a bomb came and put it, and Hitler was standing here. What actually saved Hitler was that there was a reinforcement, you know, those benches that have a reinforcement. And he was hurt. It was the same time that the Dutch was visiting, you know who the Dutch is? Mussolini was visiting. You see, Wongani, my history is not as bad as you think it is. Mussolini was arriving, and Hitler goes and meet him at the station with a fractured arm. Famous picture. And at that time, Hitler was starting to shake a lot, you know. So it was the beginning of the end. And Hitler, when it was coming to an end, he took lessons from a Roman emperor called Nero. And Nero had something called a scorched earth policy. And of course, the scorched earth policy, we don't enter it for the first time. Certainly, the first time, scorched earth policy. Let's cut the baby into half. Another one says, if you're going to cut the baby into half, let her have the child. And Solomon said, no. The one who is actually not willing to have the baby cut is actually the mother. The other one was doing Scotch Earth policy, that if I can't win, nobody can win. So he wanted things destroyed. And of course, what happened now, Speer now, he got 10 years at Nuremberg, and part of the reason why he got 10 years was that during that time, he actually started preventing the Scorched Earth Conference. So the Nazis were on the run. You see, I met somebody with a German name in South America. And I was making a little bit of a joke. What is your historical trajectory? Because the Germans went to South America. Some of them actually lived a full life. A doctor by the name Mengele, who used to specialize on killing twins, actually lived until he died. So they ran to South America. Through the collaboration, I should say this, and this is actually quite controversial. And please, universities are about controversial issues. Through the collaboration of the Catholic Church. And when I went to Kigali, and I went to the concentration camp, I also saw the hands of the Catholic Church actually operating on that genocide. Something that we need to understand. Why? Why? So through the collaboration of the Catholic Church, he ended up in Argentina. He was very active in the German community there. He used to work for the VW plant. He was there for quite a number of years when he started feeling quite sufficiently safe. He had a different name, but Mrs. Eichmann joined him. She joined him. And people say, hey, there's this man who actually looked like him, Eichmann, who has been joined by Mrs. Eichmann and their child. And they even had a child when they were in that part of the world. So he was feeling very comfortable. He was very active in the neo-Nazi movement there. So now the question is, didn't they know that this was a wanted criminal? Of course they did. They hid him. Now the story is that one of his sons, the name of his son is Klaus. By the way, I don't have a speaking notes. It's on from my head. This is just... the Klaus finds a very attractive woman, and he starts liking her, and they start dating. She actually happened to be a Jewish woman. And he started going to his house. And she suspected that that was Eichmann. And at that point, it was shortly after, maybe quite a number of years, the news reached authorities in Israel. The leader at that time was Ben-Gurion. And Ben-Gurion said, we're going to get Eichmann. Hopefully alive. Well, alive. So they went and he was abducted. And after he was abducted, it was not safe to take him out. They actually remained for more than a week until it was safe to leave, and they left, and Eichmann actually arrives in Jerusalem. So that is the title of the book. And the trial goes on, and then he is sentenced to death. Now, during the trial, and this is how Hannah actually comes into the picture. Hannah was actually from Germany. She studied under a German philosopher called Martin Heidegger. And Martin Heidegger, in fact, she had an affair with Martin Heidegger. She did. And of course, Martin Heidegger joined the Nazi Party. And he became a Nazi. And the rest is history. In fact, the German philosophical intellectualism has never recovered from the Second World War. Of Kant, Immanuel Kant, of Heidegger, Hegel, who was obviously instrumental in the formation of Marxism, because that is where Marx actually got much of the ideas. So she flee to United States. She was lucky enough to flee to United States. And then when this trial came, she decided that she's going to go there as a journalist. So she covered this trial, and she writes a book called The Banality of the Eichmann in Jerusalem. No, it's not. I will tell you where the banality comes through. And I will read for you. Look, as a series of articles. And she became controversial for a number of reasons. The first one was something called the Jewish Council. In every city you used to have something Jewish Council. I don't want to get into trouble here. But I am sitting with Wongani. It's a book written by Mzala Nxumalo. It's called The Chief with Double Agenda. Very controversial, you know. My only problem with that book is that the second reason why it was controversial was that in her observation of Eichmann, so you see, that's the problem when you read from Kindle. If it was just an ordinary book, I will know where it is. Maybe I should have just an ordinary book. Now, so Eichmann is sentenced to death. Adolf Eichmann went to the gallows with great dignity. He had asked for a bottle of red wine and had drunk half of it. He refused the help of a Protestant minister, the Reverend William Hull, who offered to read the Bible with him. He had only 2 more hours to live and therefore had no time to waste. He walked the 50 yards from his cell to the execution chamber, calm and erect, with his hands bound behind him. When the guards tied his ankles and knees, he asked them to loosen their bonds so that he could stand straight. "I don't need that," he said when the black hood was offered him. He was in complete command of himself. Nay, he was more. He was completely himself. Nothing could have demonstrated this more convincingly than the gruesome silliness of his last words. He began by stating emphatically that he was a hot beggar, to express in common Nazi fashion that he was not a Christian and did not believe in life after death. He then proceeded. After a short while, then I quote, this is now him speaking. "After a short while, gentlemen, we shall all meet again. Such is the fate of all men. Long live Germany, long live Argentina, long live Austria. I shall not forget them." Close quote. In the face of death, he had found the cliché used in funeral oratory. Under the gallows, his memory played him the last trick. He was elated, and he forgot that that was his own funeral. It was as though in those last minutes, he was summing up the lesson that this long course in human wickedness had taught us. The lesson of the fearsome word and thought-defying banality of evil. That is the only time she uses the word banality of evil, and it became the most important word that he invented. So this is the story of Eichmann. There is Eichmann in all of us. No, I'm serious. So we need to guard against evil. There is evil in all of us. And for whatever reason, by the way, I have not killed people. They are in our communities. They are in our homes. Sometimes we cover for them. We know about that abusive uncle in the family where you will be told, you can't hang dirty linens out. You know that, isn't it? You know? Those are evil things. They are in our communities, they are in our family. So the good people are those who, by sheer determination, actually strive every day to do good things. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Prof. Marwala. I'm going to take the privilege of chair and just elaborate a little bit on some of the things Prof. Marwala was saying before I hand over to Rabbi Julie. And I think this is going to be quite a good segue into her story. I'm going to share just a little bit about my own story. So my grandparents come from Germany and Holland. And we were talking about, the whole thing has been about the banality of evil. And when I asked my grandparents, so why?